If you want to see how to properly implement a movie-like flair into your video game, look no farther than Sucker Punch's Ghost of Tsushima, as it blends its realistic visuals with a heavy dose of masterful cinematography. From the gameplay, to the camera angles, to the lighting, and to the narrative, every component of the title has been carefully crafted to not only meet player expectations of open-world games, but more so on how to present them with the undeniable feel of a movie-going experience. At the end of the day though, this isn't a movie, it's a video game, and it's a damn good one. I've already alluded to the masterful presentation, but the gameplay is no slouch either, as it provides an enriching combat experience full of different styles, weaponry, skills, and stances to master as you embrace both the samurai code and the guerrilla warfare of fighting from the shadows. Exploration is impactful, and every point of interest allows Jin Sakai to become an even better warrior, whether this is by increasing health, or earning new charms, or gaining resolve. Everything you uncover contributes in ways, big and small, towards rebuilding Jin as a powerful force in Tsushima after his initial fall. The story may appear surface level at first, but ends up being impactful by the game's conclusion by exploring themes of honor, tradition, and the cost of victory. Ghost of Tsushima is one of the greatest titles I've played in 2020 and is probably my frontrunner for Game of the Year, and I want to share with you why that is in this critique that's pretty much disguised as a review. So welcome to Samurai in Style, my review of Ghost of Tsushima. I've decided to kick off this review by focusing in on the game's presentation and performance first, and that's because a primary focus of the game's design is its cinematic quality. Whether you're talking about the beautiful vistas, the buttery smooth combat animations, the Kurosawa mode that allows for the entire game to be played in black and white, or the photo mode that lets you capture it all, there's no denying that Ghost of Tsushima hopes to replicate a samurai film. Now, I'm no expert on that genre of movies, but even to the casual observer, this focus is evident. Graphically, the game contains some of the most beautiful scenes of nature that we've encountered in this medium so far. The Last of Us Part 2 was the game I played right before this one, and it's a tough act to follow in terms of texture work and graphical fidelity. You won't find nearly as much detail here, but what we do get is a realistic art style that emphasizes the serene nature of this landscape and how that clashes with the destruction of war. The island is littered with tons of gorgeous outlooks that will make your jaw drop as the wind gently pushes through and leaves tumble gently to the ground. This is only enhanced during the day when the incredible lighting is allowed to shine, no pun intended. While not quite as spectacular, the covering of night also creates some wonderful moonlit environments. The lighting effects feel next-gen to me here, and it gives me a lot of hope for how incredible games will look on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. The topography of the island is also designed in a way that's reminiscent of geography on our real planet, but it also includes enough different types of biomes in order to make each location stand out from one another. This includes the snow-capped mountains of Jokaku, the marshy swamps of Umugi, and the sweeping forest lands of Izuhara. Environments transition into one another in realistic ways, and it makes this island all the more believable as a genuine landscape to explore and understand. Sucker Punch built a beautiful world for us all to explore, and they knew it too, because the design of the HUD has been kept to a minimum in order to maximize the impact of the landscapes. This has got to be one of the most clever takes on HUDs that we've seen so far, and it eliminates that issue that plagues so many open world games, the tendency in players to have their eyes glued to the minimap instead of the game world. The developers solved this issue in a few key ways. First, the HUD is kept to a bare minimum. The health bar and resolve meter are displayed in the lower left-hand corner, but not all the time, only when that information is relevant, like in combat sequences. And the same goes for quest objectives and location markers. Very rarely will the game highlight anything more than enemies in this game's version of the Witcher senses, or Joel's hearing, or Agent 47's instinct, or whatever you want to call it. They want you to be immersed into this world, and so quest markers like this are usually omitted, and it's left up to the player to think about the space they're in and act logically, which is great. On top of that, in order to make sure players don't get lost without a minimap, they've also included a new navigation system called the Guiding Winds. By swiping up on the touchpad, a clear gust of wind will breeze through, pointing you towards your marked location on the map. This gust also moves grass and plants so that it's never hard to distinguish the direction it's moving. Again, it keeps you in the world and minimizes the opportunities for the player to be taken out of the experience. This system made me almost never want to fast travel, although when you do, it's very quick to load most of the time. And another similar system to the Guiding Wind would be these little yellow songbirds that fly around and guide you to nearby points of interest. I can't tell you how many times I was on my way to a temple or a village only to get sidetracked by one of these birds, but as we will see in the gameplay section, I mean this in the best way. Overall, the HUD design of Ghost of Tsushima is commendable and innovative, and it allows your suspension of disbelief to relax just a bit. The HUD considerations are meant to keep you immersed in the world and enjoy the cinematic shots that they've composed for you. But the heads-up display isn't the only way they go about emphasizing this movie-like feel. Sharp camera angles are used when riding around Tsushima on your horse, giving it a little extra flair and purpose. It highlights the importance of Jin's work and the impact his success will have. Truly, I gleaned all of this just from these more pronounced camera angles. The game also generously includes a photo mode that will eat up hours of playtime for those who enjoy these sorts of modes. Now, I personally have never been into photo modes, but from what I've seen and what I've heard, it's one of the better ones that will see you screenshotting tons of moments if you're into that sort of thing. Also, title cards are displayed over environmental details at the start and end of every main mission, side mission, and mythic tale, which gives each of them a bit more weight. And they feel like small chapters in a grander tale because of this small but impactful touch. These may prove to be a bit long in the tooth during subsequent playthroughs, but on a first run, it enhances the presentation, giving everything you do just a little bit of extra meaning. And finally, the developers graciously include ways to alter the presentation to your liking, whether it be playing the entire game in Kurosawa mode, which is an all black and white filter inspired by Akira Kurosawa films, or with full Japanese voice acting. And I can't understate it, these are substantial additions that allow the player to customize the graphical and audio output in ways that many other games just aren't doing. It's safe to say that the graphics of this game blew me away. Music is perhaps the game's weakest component of the presentation, but not because it's bad, but just that it's kept to a minimum most of the time. During free exploration, the music barely plays, and perhaps that's to enhance the believability. It will, however, swell in from time to time and make itself known before fading back into the sounds of the Guiding Winds. In this way, it's kind of reserved so that when it does show up, it feels more impactful. To be fair though, the only track I really can remember is that's played during combat because, again, it plays every time swords clash. Oh, and the deep chants and accompanying music that you hear while writing haikus, yeah, that stuck with me too. There isn't an abundance of in-your-face music, but when it does show up, it helps to emphasize the emotional point of whatever is happening in that cutscene or in-game moment. In terms of sound work, Ghost does a great job of using the audio component to make environments more realized, as well as to cue the player in on pertinent information. I mean, just a few examples now. I'm a sucker for riding horses in open world games, and the sound of my mighty horse Nobu's hooves connecting with dirt always provided satisfaction and believability. The sound of a yellow songbird chirping was always enough to lure me to new points of interest. Mongol warriors will call out to their comrades when they're about to fire an arrow at you, hinting you in on when to use your dodge roll. It's subtle things like this that help build the atmosphere of Tsushima, while also providing the player with cues to react in combat. These are but a few excellent examples of attention to detail that you will find in the sound work of this game. In terms of character animations and voice acting, we have another great effort. The voice work overpowers the character animations, but both are beyond passable. I hate to bring up The Last of Us Part 2 again, but it is the game I played right before this, and so the facial animations of this title felt decidedly stiff. However, looking past that influence, it's clear that this work is right up there with the industry standard. I do wish characters moved around a little bit more while having conversations, but the footlock postures that we do have give credence to the movie-like feeling. You get a lot of one-on-one conversations where the characters hardly ever break eye contact, but it does lead to more tension within those scenes. And while the characters may appear a little bit rigid, at least the voice work is very well done across the entire cast of actors. For me, there's two things that can make for bad voice acting. One, being unable to express the proper emotions within the context of the scene, and two, voices that don't fit the expectation for how I perceive their voice should sound given the character design. Ghost of Tsushima doesn't settle for any subpar work, and scenes of quiet resolve, dramatic anger, newfound respect, and of clashing ideals are all portrayed with proper tones and voice inflections. If I had to choose favorites, I'd say that the voice of Daisuke Tsuji, who plays Jin, and Francois Shao, who plays Sensei Ishikawa, were the best.
I gave her everything, and she threw it away.
She's a threat. There is only one way this ends.
I know what must be done.
Knowing and doing are different.
You are questioning whether I am samurai?
Tsuji was able to convince me of Jin's pain and struggles, but also of his ironclad resolve and determination to save his homeland. And these are but a few performances amongst many that hit the nail on the head. Wrapping up the presentation section now, we come to the performance, and I'm glad to report that we have another instance of no major bugs, glitches, crashes, or issues. Across the 45 hours it took me to platinum the game, I didn't experience any sort of crashes or frame rate drops. The game loads quickly too in most instances, which was always appreciated. The only instance of this not being the case were at the end of some missions where the end card would show up and then Jin seemed kind of frozen in the animation as the world state loaded back to normal with no quest active. Still, that's a nitpick. There was also a handful of times where Jin would get stuck between objects in the environment, and this would correct itself after a few seconds, so again, not really an issue. I'm grasping at straws here. The only other concern of note is that sometimes the guiding wind doesn't always work. Yes, there are times when it doesn't work if you don't have an objective set. However, I had a few cases where I would swipe with a destination marked and nothing would happen, as if the game didn't register my swipe. Again, nothing that will jeopardize your immersion or ruin the experience. In an era where so many games seem rushed, this is one title that feels like it received all the necessary love and care before being shipped out to the masses. I don't usually talk about accessibility options in games, but I feel compelled to note here that there's a few different things to play around with to make things more accommodating to gamers who require extra assistance. And so ultimately, when it comes to the presentation and performance of Ghost of Tsushima, the thing that impresses me most is that they've designed an art style, menu system, and general look for the game that invokes a cinematic touch and flair, while also affording the player many ways to adjust things to their liking without losing that quality. It gives the title a more distinct style than most other AAA games, and that's something to be cherished and praised. So much work has gone into this game's look and feel, and it's evident that everyone working on this title had a shared, complete vision full of passion, dedication, inspiration, and love of the subject matter. Because Ghost of Tsushima is an open-world game, its gameplay can be broken up into two major categories: exploration and combat. Combat is excellent, but for me personally, exploration actually managed to outshine it. Almost everything you uncover in your examination of Tsushima will lead you to new armors, new weapons, new techniques, new charms, and new tools for Jin to use in combat. Exploration is worthwhile because everything you can uncover trickles back into making Jin a more capable fighter, and with the threat of an entire Mongol invasion at the door, this man's gonna need every advantage that he can get. While exploring Tsushima, Jin and the player can uncover 5 different types of content outside of the main story missions. These include side quests, ally quests, Mythic Tales quests, points of interest, and collectibles and Easter eggs. There isn't much to say about collectibles, so we'll start with that. Most collectibles, like Mongol records and Tsushima artifacts, are not much more than ways to further your understanding of the game world. I didn't really get much out of them, but I did pick up 20 of each of them on my way to the Platinum Trophy. You can also collect banners across Tsushima that can be traded in for new saddles for your horse, which is nice, I guess. What I really wanted to mention here, and yes, this is totally 100% a guilty pleasure, is the fact that you can stumble upon these Easter eggs, my favorite of which is a reference to the Sly Cooper games. If you're new to this channel, yeah, let these video thumbnails be proof that I'm a mega fan of the Sly Cooper series. And there's a trophy completely dedicated to it, and one of the items you need to unlock is hidden on a cliffside, and you have to walk across these 2 ropes, which is a lovely homage to Sly's adventures. Yes, I love it, it's a guilty pleasure, but I'm just so glad it exists. Anyway, let's move on to the more important stuff. So that was the collectibles. That was the first out of the 5 things you can do. The second thing is the side missions. And when I discuss side missions here, I'm simply referring to the one-off missions where you meet an NPC, help them out, and then move on with things. I'm clarifying this because there's also ally quests that are multi-stepped and have recurring characters, but are also completely optional. The ally quests help you get a better understanding of the people accompanying you across the journey, but the side quests help flesh out the world around you, in particular, the pain that the Mongol invasion has brought to these people. Each of them lasts about 15 minutes and usually involves combat, or stealth pursuing a guard, or investigating a crime scene, and tracking people using footprints. Oh, and those footprints don't show up in your Samurai Sense mode. You have to follow the actual indentations in the dirt, which once again signals their dedication to realism and immersion. Anyway, I figured I'd highlight a couple of the side missions to demonstrate Jin's dedication to helping people and how they aid in the world building of an island in disarray and chaos. A father's choice sees Jin stumbling across a man mourning over the loss of his son. He tells the samurai that the Mongols forced him to decide which of his 2 sons would live and which one would die. After which, the Mongols killed the one he designated to live and kidnapped the other one that he had doomed. You don't find this out though until close to the end of the side mission, after you rescue the son and he curses his father for choosing to have him killed. You return back to the father to find that he's killed himself, unable to face the overwhelming guilt he feels. For this family, the Mongol invaders broke the family, and this resulted in two of them being killed and their surviving son to wind up alone with a lot of bitterness towards his father. Jin does what he can to help reunite them, but his efforts come up short. This game isn't afraid of unhappy endings, which is a testament to the state of this world that's ravaged by war. The next side mission we're going to look at sees Jin meeting up with a healer who seeks protection on a journey to a nearby camp to heal some sick people. Along the way, the two men stop to help a mother heal her son. This stop saves the child, but winds up causing Jin and the healer to be late to arrive to the camp. The precious lost time resulted in many folks succumbing to poisoning after the Mongols sabotaged their water supply. The medicine man feels like he let the community down by not arriving in time, but Jin's fortitude shines through as he encourages him to help those who are still alive and suffering now that they've uncovered the cause. This quest helps reinforce Jin's leadership qualifications, his ability to motivate those around him, and the general respect that people have for him as he puts everything into helping the people of Tsushima survive. Finally, one powerful side quest actually involves one of your allies, but is divorced from her ally quest. Jin accompanies Lady Masako as she looks for the body of her sons on the beach where the Mongol invasion began. Crossing the blood-soaked sandy beaches shows us just how serious a toll the initial attack had on the number of available warriors to defend the land. Jin is the last living member of Clan Sakai, and you truly feel that here after seeing how many perished. So eventually, you find Lady Masako's sons, but they were killed execution style by hanging. It is a heart-wrenching scene as a mother cries out in sorrow and pain at the sight of what happened to her children. This scene really hit hard and strengthened my resolve to wipe out the Mongols, which aligned perfectly with Jin's motivations. From there, you accompany Masako and wipe out some nearby Mongols to clear a spot for her to bury her kids by their favorite spot. I almost wish this mission didn't include combat, because the gamification of it took away from the emotional impact a little bit, but it still accomplishes its goal. There's a lot more side missions like this spread across the entire game, but hopefully this small sample size helps you see how they built up the world of Tsushima and the threats that it's facing. Next up we have Ally Quest, which is some of the best side content I've seen in games since The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, and that game came out half a decade ago now. For years now, I've been waiting for a game to push side narratives and side stories as far as that game, but I haven't seen it until now. Like I said, the side missions help to shape your view of Tsushima, but the ally quests are designed to really let its inhabitants shine. Just because Jin is the playable character, it doesn't mean that he's the only one facing trouble across the island and that everything revolves around him. Your fellow samurai and allies are each facing issues of their own, and you can help them solve those problems without solving them outright. That's one of the things I love most about the ally quests. None of them really have traditional happy endings. Jin's aid doesn't prove to be some sort of miracle work that leaves everyone better off than they were before, just to stroke the player's ego, and it allows the world to feel lived in regardless of the player's actions. Seriously, I know I flashed a spoiler warning at the beginning of the video, but this side content is so good that I'm going to give a second spoiler warning right here. If you love side content that enhances the main story, the world building, and isn't over in just a few minutes, then you'll want to check out Ghost of Tsushima. The ally quests are some of the best pieces of content in the game, and they deserve to be seen with fresh eyes, so you can skip ahead to this time in the video if you want to skip that part of the review. If you're still watching, then I'm going to briefly go over one of these ally quests and demonstrate the points I just made, and it happens to be my favorite in the game, that of Sensei Ishikawa. Ishikawa is an expert in the field of archery, and Jin first meets up with him after the initial Mongol attack after the sensei failed to show up in defense of the island. He gives us our own bow to use and tells us that the reason he didn't show up is that he was trying to track down his apprentice named Tomoe. This is a main quest that must be completed to finish the game, but after this, the player unlocks 9 optional ally missions around Sensei Ishikawa spanning the rest of the game. Throughout it, Jin helps Ishikawa track down Tomoe as he learns that his apprentice betrayed him and is teaching the Mongols his way of the bow. From here, you go about finding Tomoe, but you always get the feeling that this is Ishikawa's battle and that you're just along for the ride to aid him in exchange for his help in the main missions. For instance, sometimes you'll show up at his mission marker and he just won't be there. A peasant will tell you that Ishikawa was there, but he took off after hearing some Mongols. He doesn't always stand around idly waiting for you to show up. He does things on his own. So during the first half of the missions, Tomoe is painted as a complete wrongdoer and a person that Ishikawa will never be able to forgive. Throughout the span of these missions though, Jin begins to see that Ishikawa is obsessed over finding Tomoe, so much so that he's making sloppy moves that could get him killed, like rushing into an enemy camp after believing Tomoe could be there. The two men actually butt heads quite a few times, and Jin challenges Ishikawa's methods and his motivations, and this eventually results in Ishikawa confronting the truth. He is doubly pained by her betrayal because she was the closest thing that he had to family. In a quiet, snowy moment, he lets his guard down and tells Jin to not end up like him. The bow gave him a great life, but it also robbed him of so much.
I devoted my life to the bow. The life it gave me was remarkable. But the life it took from me... Family is more important.
Sensei?
Don't become like me. Don't let the ghost consume you.
In the end, you track down Tomoe and even begin to learn her side of the story, and it results with a reunion between the master and the apprentice, and I'm gonna leave it at that. I don't want to spoil every detail, especially the ending. Throughout these 9 missions, you see Ishikawa open up more and more about his relationship with Tomoe, his anger at her betrayal, and his eventual reflection on what he partially considers to be a wasted life. This is truly his story, and the developers were able to make him feel like a real person by the quest's conclusion. Jin doesn't single-handedly show up and do all the legwork for Ishikawa while he stands around idly. He accompanies you throughout the missions with frequent interactions and emotionally charged moments. You don't decide the fate of Ishikawa or Tomoe like you might in other games. Instead, you just kind of exist in their world. You can influence things as much as one person naturally could, but your allies still think, act, and behave on their own volition. All of the ally quests are like this, multi-staged, impactful quests full of heart and great combat sequences that truly leaves you feeling like you just heard the life story of an actual person. So that's 3 out of the 5 pieces of exploration addressed. The side content, the collectibles, and then the ally quest. So next up we have Mythic Tales. There's a handful of these in the game, and they're your ticket to learning legendary samurai moves or unlocking access to some different armor sets. These are one-off missions, and they begin by speaking with a musician who will share a legendary tale with Jin that describes the history behind the technique or the armor set in question. You get these awesome scenes showing off the lore of each item and the backstory behind them, which is a nice touch. From there, Jin sets out to find the items, and the content within these missions is pretty varied. One will see you climbing a frigid mountain in a time trial-esque way, as if you take too long, you'll freeze to death. And one has you using drawings to track down an armor set. And another one sees you tracking down a Mongol who's learned an ancient technique that you seek to learn. You duel him one-on-one and end up learning the move and dealing the killing blow with it. Now I must concede that while I enjoyed the structure and flow of these Mythic Tale quests, I hardly ever used the armor sets, while contrarily, I spammed a lot of the combat techniques while fighting, as they proved to be a little too overpowered. We'll talk about that more in the combat section though. For now, I'll say these quests are another excellent supplementary piece of side content, as they give you just a little bit of the lore behind this place. In other words, you get to live out and experience the stories and tales that grandfathers probably tell their grandchildren all across Tsushima, and that's a great touch. Finally, we can wrap up our discussion of exploration and side content by looking at the various points of interest you can stumble across in the open world. There's a ton of them, and I'll briefly go over each category, but just know that each of these tiny tasks results in a nice reward for the player that goes towards making Jin a more accomplished samurai and overall threat to the Mongols, bandits, and traitors that stand in his way. You feel the impact of these small prizes, and they build up over time, making them feel like worthwhile inclusions, as well as some of the best ways to see some of the natural sights and sounds of Tsushima. So here we go. Up first, there's naturally occurring hot springs all over the island of Tsushima, and taking a few moments to soak results in Jin's overall health getting a slight boost. It also serves as a quiet moment where Jin can reflect on the people in his life, the events of the invasion, or just memories of a simpler time. They're just short snippets, but they do help in humanizing Jin. Number 2, Fox Shrines are small statues built in quiet tucked away places across Tsushima, and discovering them allows Jin to unlock charm slots as well as to upgrade his charm power. I loved following these foxes and petting them at the end of each run, but to be honest, I wish the game was clearer about what increasing charm power means. I finished the game and I found all the shrines, but I still have no clue what increasing charm power means. It just never told me, and I never bothered to look it up. Still, these are such short pieces of content, it's hard to resist completing them when you stumble upon them. Number 3, Shinto shrines provide some of the best views in the entire game, and you have to earn these outlooks by completing platforming-based challenges. Jin does a lot of the legwork for you, and most of the time it's just about discovering the correct path, which is fine. Most of the time, finding the entrance is the toughest part. Although this isn't a platformer game, and so I don't really mind the hand-holding. At the end of these, Jin can claim a unique charm which are used to augment his abilities, so it's a pretty decent reward for completing these, alongside of the natural one of seeing the beautiful vistas. Number 4, one way that samurai clear their minds and harness control over their emotions is by writing haiku, and you'll get to do some of that across Tsushima. Alongside the Shinto shrines, the haiku writing provides some of the most breathtaking visuals across the game. The player is asked to reflect on a theme and then choose from options to make their own haiku, which is awesome. And completing these also rewards the player with a new headband that they can equip. This game does a fantastic job with cosmetics, and this is one way that they support that. Number 5, samurais must keep their physical prowess with a katana up to speed by practicing on bamboo. Across Tsushima, you can find different outposts with bamboo strikes set up. Here, the player has to memorize and input button prompts in quick succession. The first trial has 3 prompts, the second has 5, and the final one has 7. Some of these are very challenging and will test your button skill. I found myself staring at the controller and practicing for some of these 7 input combos. I mean, it was ultra satisfying to complete these, and they go towards leveling up Jin's resolve, which is used for healing and souped up moves. So yeah, it's very useful to complete these. And number 6, finally, the rest of the side content has to do with combat. There's a handful of duels that you can participate in against a group of traitors, which makes for awesome set pieces in stunning locations. There's also lighthouses that are sometimes guarded by Mongols that need to be lit up to send a message to the invaders that you won't back down. And in good fashion, there's also a plentiful number of enemy camps for you to clear out and reclaim. They are all well designed and allow both styles of combat to shine, as we will soon see. Oh, and by the way, little yellow songbirds will guide you to all these sorts of locations, all the 6 I just mentioned, and it's another way that the game minimizes the role of the HUD to keep you engaged, and I love it. I can't praise it enough. Discussing those enemy camps makes for a good time to conclude the exploration section of the gameplay and instead shift our focus to the combat. To sum up my thoughts on it, it's excellent. It provides the player with a lot of freedom and choice, and my only complaint with it is that difficulty on the normal setting becomes too easy as Jin unlocks more weapons, stances, and damage boosts across the game. As we will see, you can play as a samurai with honor, or as the ghost with stealth, and one of these approaches is so much more satisfying than the other. Originally, I viewed this as a weakness, but as we will come to see, it lines up so well thematically with the story being told that I can't really overly criticize it too much. So as I mentioned before, there's 2 distinct ways to approach any given combat section, either in a straight up fight as a true samurai, or as a stealthy but deadly assassin who strikes fear in the hearts of the Mongols. At the game's outset, Jin adheres to the samurai code and fights with honor and respect for his enemies, but after realizing how powerless his clan was against the Mongols, he begins to practice increasingly more and more sneaky techniques that directly contradict with the samurai code. Narratively, Jin has to pay a heavy price for adopting these more ruthless approaches to combat, but from a gameplay perspective, it makes for a lot of engaging, fun, and interesting mechanics. So what I want to do now is to look at both the samurai fighting style as well as the ghost fighting style and do a deep dive into what makes up each method and then demonstrate how one is really superior to the other, but probably by intentional design. At the outset of the game, Jin's samurai code dictates that he fights with honor, and this form of combat means facing enemies head on. I'll be referring to this more direct approach as samurai combat from here on. This method involves announcing your presence upon approaching enemies and fighting them straight up. They've built an interesting mechanic around this called standoffs, wherein Jin will announce his intent to fight and then begin the encounter with a one-on-one against one of the enemies. You hold down triangle to begin your stance, wait for the enemy to attack, and release triangle right before the enemy makes contact, killing them instantly. You can even chain this against other Mongols up to 5 times with the proper gear and skill points. The drawback is if you release the button too early, you get nearly all your health taken away. It's a steep price to pay. Jin recharges his health by using Resolve, which can refill in a bunch of different ways, including stealth kills, standoff kills, and by taking damage or killing enemies if you have the right charms equipped, but more on those later. Resolve is also used to perform the mythic tail techniques you earned in those quests, like the Heavenly Strike or the Dance of Wrath, but again, more on those in a little bit. After the standoff chain ends, the rest of the Mongol encampment will be alerted of Jin's location and come charging after him. That's true for smaller camps anyway. The larger camps are cleverly divided into sections, wherein one section becoming alerted doesn't mean that all of them are. This allows the player to avoid being overwhelmed and to re-establish the stealth approach if they're aiming for that. Back to what I was saying though, the Mongols are coming at you now, and you can dispatch them using one of 4 samurai stances. The 4 stances are each effective against different enemy types, and they all include a basic attack, a heavy posture breaking attack, and a powerful combo to deal out lots of damage. It requires the player to be cognizant of what kind of enemy they are attacking, because using the wrong stance against an enemy won't see their posture bar fill up as rapidly, which leads to more chances for them to counter or damage you. For instance, if you're using the moon stance, which is typically reserved for brutes, on a shield guard, you won't get a lot of results, but if you switch to the water stance, you'll cut right through them most of the time. There are of course some enemies that don't require a specific stance, like archers and predator dogs, but for the most part, you'll be switching through these stances a lot if you choose to play primarily this way. The limited number of stances does, in turn, limit the enemy variety though, and it does become noticeable as you keep playing. The enemies get stronger versions of themselves, but they serve only as checks to make sure you've been upgrading your swords and armor. Eventually, straight up combat like this devolves into register an enemy type, switch to that stance, and spam triangle to break the posture before dealing the killing blow. Now, yes, there is a full-fledged set of parry and dodge mechanics, but for the most part, you won't really need them. You can just hammer triangle and it will see you win the day, especially on the normal difficulty. You also get this awesome sense that you're performing a deadly dance, because there's no lock-on mechanic. You just kind of point Jin in the direction he is to attack in. This works well most of the time, but there were a handful of instances when he went after someone I didn't intend, which was kind of frustrating and resulted in me absorbing damage. But also, the ultra smooth combat animations do keep this repetition fun to look at, but as you reach the second and third acts, you get the unshakable doubt in the back of your mind that each round of samurai combat is a carbon copy of the last. Now, they do make a lot of effort to spice up samurai combat by including a ton of one-on-one duels across the entirety of the game that help maintain the cinematic edge that the game pushes for. The camera angle is pulled well in, close to Jin, as he demonstrates his prowess with a katana. These fights compare functionally to your standard combat, but the intensity level is increased due to the enemy's increased health, damage, and the nature of the presentation. They do make one flaw of the combat system a little easier to see though, and that's how enemies can sometimes slide across the ground straight towards you to connect on a hit from very far distances. It's kind of like how Batman jumps around in the Arkham games, except it's being done to you, and it doesn't feel good when a dodge roll seems perfectly executed, but you still take damage because of the extra reach. However, I do still appreciate these duels. It shows that even as Jin adopts more and more scare tactics, he still pays respect to his heritage and way of life by not backing down from these sorts of fights. And because the player isn't allowed to use any ghost weaponry during them, it allows the samurai fighting technique to shine through in its best form. Overall, the samurai combat is fine for what it is. It's a bit basic and repetitive, but it does look sick as hell when you can chain a series of dodges and strikes, and it's good enough to engage with throughout the game. But a big reason for that is that you can mix in ghost techniques as well, so let's have a look at those. Ghost combat, as I will be referring to it from here on out, involves taking to the shadows and picking off enemies one by one in stealth using a small knife, a bow and arrow, and an assortment of other crafty weaponry like kunais, sticky bombs, and blow darts. By far, the most dominant strategy of the game is to enter enemy encampments utilizing stealth for as long as you can, taking out foes one by one until you get discovered, and then shift into that samurai combat. To be quite clear, while I am dividing up ghost combat and samurai combat into different sections, almost every encounter will include both types. I just think it's easier to split them up for analysis. So the ghost combat skills, techniques, and weaponry do prove to be the most efficient way to play, given how many of them result in one-hit KOs or set up situations for one-hit KOs. The level design encourages players to take a dual approach in combat, by first picking off as many enemies as possible before going in head-on. Jin can climb on top of tents and watchtowers to look down on enemies, and he's practically invincible while on top of them, which sometimes feels a little stupid if he's not that high up. But anyway, the point remains that you're given opportunities to look down on your enemies and plan an attack. You can even begin the attack here by picking off solo archers or luring enemies beneath you for a stealth kill. There's also ways to traverse over the heads of enemies, as you can hurtle between rooftops and pull a Sly Cooper to walk on ropes. And on the ground level, there's also plenty of that good old tall grass for you to hide in, which makes you invisible to enemies until they're right on top of you. These stealthy opportunities are afforded to you in spades, and you are encouraged to use them, which lines up perfectly with Jin's changing mindset on how to engage in combat. Okay, so what tools does Jin have access to when engaging in ghost-style combat? Well, Jin can hold a handful of kunai that can be thrown at enemies, weaker ones will die in one hit, while stronger ones will be staggered long enough for Jin to do massive damage. You can increase the number of kunai that Jin can carry as well as how many he throws at one time. I'm almost certainly front-loading my argument here, but this is by far Jin's most consistent and powerful ghost weapon to dispatch foes. If you get stuck in a jam, throw a couple of these, and it's essentially a free kill on 3 enemies, as the rest just stand around in fear, or just idly by waiting to be killed. They are a get-out-of-jail-free card in combat, and out of all the tools, I think this one needed to be nerfed the most. It's very powerful, and it's easily accessible since you can find them on corpses in Mongol camps. Next up, we have 2 versions of the bow that function the same mechanically. One headshots normal guards, and the other can headshot guards with helmets. There's also fire arrows and explosive arrows to deal some extra damage. These serve as a basic ranged attack, and I don't find a lot of trouble with them because lining up shots in quick succession can take a lot of practice, especially if arrows are being fired back at you. So kunais and bows, these were the tools I used the most, but there's plenty more to go over. Sticky bombs can be thrown at enemies and explode after a few seconds, knocking down the enemy and a few enemies around them while doing a bit of damage. Just like the kunai, it opens up a big window of opportunity to deal some damage and thin the herd. I didn't use these too much, as they function very similarly to kunai. It was more of a pick your poison, but yeah, with these and kunai at your disposal, you can take out a lot of intruders without much effort. Black powder bombs act in a similar manner, and I did use them quite a bit too. They provide an explosive blast that can send enemies to the ground, which opens them up to a one-hit KO in the form of a button prompt. This was a tool that I reserved for emergencies whenever I got overwhelmed, like being spotted early on in an approach. It was a way to kill a couple enemies and thin out their numbers, and I also found myself using these on brute enemies because the moon stance, it just wasn't cutting it for me to deal out enough damage. Next up, we have wind chimes and firecrackers, which act as your standard whistle or distraction tool that's so common in all stealth games. It's not rocket science. You throw a wind chime, and it lures enemies to that location. This can be used to pull off some awesome stealth kills from above, but I found them to be more situational than in other stealth games simply because stealth killing enemies is easy without the additional aid. There's tons of scenarios for you to do it, and you don't really need these that often. And that brings us to the 2 tools I use the least, smoke bombs and the blow dart gun. The smoke bomb can be used to re-establish stealth, but to be honest, most of the time, enough Mongols were vanquished that the rest could just be swept up in samurai combat. If you want to maximize stealth kills, the smoke bomb will be a great aid. And finally, the blow dart. It's actually pretty powerful as well. You can use poison darts to instantly kill any enemy it hits, which is a little broken. At least the arrows make you earn a headshot, for crying out loud. You also have these rage darts that will turn enemies against one another. Out of all the ghost weapons, this one breaks immersion the most, and it feels like an homage to the Sly Cooper games, where a similar power-up mechanic existed. The blow darts are powerful, but you do have to collect plants in the wild to restock the ammo, and to be honest, I forgot about it most of the time. So overall, we have more than enough ghost weapons that can be used to dispatch a large number of enemies in a multitude of ways before you're even discovered by a single foe. Oh, and these ghost weapons, as well as other things, can be upgraded even further, so let's look at those. There's a lot to upgrade in Ghost of Tsushima, but it doesn't really involve making any sort of permanent choice, as you can easily unlock every skill and damage buff during a platinum run of the game. On the most basic levels, you can upgrade your katana, tanto, half-bow, longbow, and armor to gain better stats. We'll talk about armor more in a bit since that's a little bit more complicated, but for now, the weapon upgrades provide simple damage boosts to your equipment, and not much more than that. It is, however, important to keep up with them as enemies get stronger and tougher. Where the upgrade system shines most is in how you can administer skill points that you earn by completing quests or side content of any kind. Many open world games the last few years feel comfortable setting up the 3-path skill tree and sticking rigidly to it. but Ghost of Tsushima offers a lot more choice on how to allocate points. All of the following can be upgraded, with more options coming within each category. You've got ghost weapons, evolving combat tactics, samurai stances, 2 full skill trees dedicated to evasion and deflection, and a set of exploration skills. These are broken up across 3 menus and really makes the player feel like there's a ton of options in front of them to choose from, and there are. Of course, like I said, you can unlock them all if you do everything in the game, but not every player is gonna do everything in the game, meaning some of the choices carry more weight for those types of players. It was so satisfying jumping from menu to see which skill I could nab next and comparing their usefulness in battle. If you enjoy the samurai combat more, you can set straight out to level up all your stances to enhance that gameplay style, while the same is true for using ghost weapons and tools. So yes, while you can easily earn every skill point in a 100% run, the game presents these choices in a way that's more impactful and varied than in many other open world games with a similar upgrade system. There's also 4 upgrades within the skills menu that can't be bought using technique points, and these are the Mythic Tale rewards I brought up before. These are some of the most powerful upgrades in the game, and their power level does end up being a bit too insane on the normal difficulty. First up, there's Heavenly Slash, which you can get pretty early into the experience. By doing a simple 2-button combo, Jin will do a ferocious but graceful slash right through an enemy that breaks their posture and leaves them open for massive damage. This move only costs 1 resolve point, which can easily be restored with the right charms or moves. This low cost but high reward outcome proves to be useful, and I spammed it a lot in combat. Dance of Wrath is another such move that costs 3 resolve points, but it lets you tear through 3 enemies with powerful swings of the katana. The higher cost doesn't make this one quite as useful, but it can be used in one-on-one duels to trivialize a boss encounter. And finally, there's the Ghost stance you unlock in Act 2, which gives you 3 free kills on any basic enemy, which is broken. This mode recharges by either slaughtering an enemy leader or chaining kills together without taking damage, and the Ghost weapons and bows make this really easy to do. But really, the point that I'd like to make here is that these Mythic Tale powers and this Ghost stance are strong enough on their own. And when you pair them up with the equally powerful ghost weapons, it can trivialize combat to the point that I barely ever have to worry about dying after the first act of the game. Yes, there is a hard mode for a reason, but normal shouldn't function as an easy mode, and unfortunately, it does. I want to wrap up this section on upgrades by looking at charms and armor. Completing Shinto shrines and side quests of all sorts will see the player amassing a heavy collection of charms. You can unlock up to 6 slots for charms, 2 major ones and 4 minor ones throughout the course of the game. Charms augment Jin's abilities in combat, and I'm happy to report that there's a lot of options here that can change up combat. Some are basic and some are more interesting. On my first playthrough, I did what I usually tend to do in these sorts of situations and picked all of the ones that increase my overall health, which is very boring, but some games only offer these sorts of surface level buffs to big stats. I didn't change up my charms too often, but I did look through them after completing the game and was pleasantly surprised. There's charms that provide perks like arrows being returned on a successful headshot, or making your melee attacks unable to be interrupted after staggering an enemy, or getting more supplies from enemy drops, and non-number based buffs to ghost tools. These are reserved to the major charms, and you only get 2 of those, meaning you have to choose carefully. I can see players experimenting a lot with these on subsequent runs, while using the minor charms to get percentage-based boosts to health and damage. In the end, the charm system provides more depth than you might originally think. And finally, there's armor. Each set of armor provides unique buffs. The Traveler's attire will lift the fog from the map in greater percentages. The Sakai clan armor boosts melee damage and health while increasing your standoff streak potential. The Mongol armor will help you avoid detection for longer. And then of course, There's the fundoshi that muffles sprinting noises. I would love to see a full playthrough of someone doing fundushi only, but as of now, this game lacks a New Game Plus mode, and that's a tragedy. Anyway, you'll be switching between armors a ton in the game depending on the circumstances you're in. All of these armor sets can be upgraded to boost their stats and provide additional looks for them, which is also appreciated. It's here where I wanted to briefly talk about customization because there's a lot of it on offer here. Every piece of armor has its basic design, but many of them have additional looks that you can unlock as well as dyes that can be used to change their color. This level of customization applies to much of Jin's looks, including his mask, his headband, his helmet, and his sword kits. The sword kits especially are just so cool, there's no other way to say it. They have a ton of detail, and each of them pop in different ways, and each are as awesome as the last. It's not difficult to make Jin appear however you want, and that's a good way to balance things in an open world game that already has a set protagonist. And unlike with skills, you'll have to do some serious grinding if you want to upgrade all of your swords, bows, and armor to full power, which does lead to some variation in how Jin appears across different players' playthroughs. So to conclude this section on gameplay, exploration is fantastic, with so many different points of interests and quest types to uncover, and the upgrade system is varied and impactful with tons of customization options for the player. Combat is very engaging with sick animations and lots of tools and stances available for you to use. My biggest issue is that a lot of those tools and mythic abilities are overly powered and can minimize the challenge. Combat can devolve into spamming these dominant techniques and then wiping up anyone remaining with spamming triangle after identifying the enemy type and changing your stance accordingly. I completed everything in the game in 45 hours, but if it had gone on for another 10 or 20 hours, I really think this combat system would have gotten a little bit stale despite all of the options. Now, that's a hypothetical situation that's only true to me, but it could set in for other players much earlier, so it's just a fair warning. This leads me to believe that if you want any sort of challenge that makes you master parrying or dodging or stances or ghost weapons, then you should play on hard mode. With all that being said, I'm about to contradict myself. Thematically, the game is about Jin's struggle in losing everything to do what is right, including abandoning his samurai code to fight dirty. The cutscenes wouldn't make sense if you only use samurai combat in moments where you directly control Jin. Therefore, I think many of the ghost tools were purposely designed to be supremely useful to ensure that the player would use them, which creates harmony between the story and the gameplay. That alone is enough for me to accept, appreciate, and enjoy the combat system on offer here without hesitation, but I figured it was important to bring this trivialization of combat up in this review. When you divorce the story and the gameplay, there's no denying how easy the game becomes on normal difficulty and how it fails to increase the challenge in impactful ways, but instead sticks to the boring method of just buffing enemies' health and damage output. And I hate to end the gameplay section on such a downer note, because this is truly one of the best experiences I've had in gaming this year in terms of minute-to-minute gameplay, and I wholeheartedly completed everything with delight. Finally, we arrive at the story, and it's broken up into 3 distinct acts. For the most part, the story has 2 major conflicts, that between Jin and the Mongols, and that of Jin versus his past. The first of these is your basic revenge or hero's tale that provides a background for the gameplay. It's this second conflict of Jin versus tradition and his upbringing that results in the most impactful beats across the story. I will be spoiling major twists and turns of the story, so if you're sensitive to spoilers or haven't finished the game yet, consider coming back to finish this video. At the outset of the experience, you take control of Jin Sakai, a samurai who's set on defending his home against an invasion force led by Kutan Khan, a relative of Genghis Khan. Despite being the head of his own samurai clan, Jin has very little family left, as his only living relative is his uncle, Lord Shimura, the head of the most powerful clan on Tsushima. We join Jin as he and Shimura arrive at Komoda Beach to attack the Mongols head-on in the traditional samurai way, by fighting head-on with honor and respect. This is the way of the samurai, but not of the Mongols. The samurai send one of their best fighters, and we get this awesome scene that establishes the threat of the Khan, as well as the two sides of combat that Jin will be torn between throughout the game. Fighting with honor and playing dirty.
Outsiders! Send your finest warrior to face me!
Nada, Kinida.
I am Harunobu Adachi, descendant of the legendary Yoshinobu Adachi.
The samurai are obliterated at the beach, and the Mongols go on to take control over many parts of the island. Lord Shimura is kidnapped, and Jin is saved by a thief named Yuna, who helps him recover his armor and his weaponry. Jin makes a feeble attempt to save his uncle at Castle Kaneda, where the Khan is residing. Jin is dispatched easily by the Khan and thrown over a bridge, forcing our samurai hero to reassess what it will take to sack the Khan and reclaim the castle. We get a flashback that establishes how important the samurai code is to Lord Shimura and to Jin. Fighting with respect for the enemy has been ingrained in Jin from a young age. There's more of these flashback sequences across the game, and they do a fantastic job of showing Jin's guilt as he indulges in more and more forbidden techniques. Eventually, Jin finds Yuna, and the two begin formulating a plan for how to take back the castle, and this kicks off Act 1, which is about finding and establishing your allies, helping Yuna to save her brother, and planning a rescue attempt. In Act 1, we meet Sensei Ishikawa, a sake salesman named Kenji, Yuna and her brother Taka, Lady Masako, and Jin's old friend Ryuzo, who leads the Straw Hat Ronin. It's also here where Jin begins to dip his toes into the water and explore combat that involves attacking from the shadows and stealth killing enemies. Lord Shimura even gets word of these actions and believes the Khan is lying about Jin's new techniques. Act 1 concludes with Jin and company attacking Castle Kaneda and saving Lord Shimura, but not before it's revealed that Ryuzo has betrayed you out of desperation and revenge in order to save his people by partnering up with the Khan. You fight him once, but he ends up escaping, only to do jack shit in Act 2, as we will see. With Shimura free, the player unlocks another section of the map where the next set of events will unfold. Act 2 is about establishing the rift between Jin and his uncle, as the latter bears witness firsthand to the former's descent from the samurai code. Shimura pleads with Jin to avoid the ever-growing persona that is the Ghost, and stick to the samurai way. He intends to adopt his nephew as his own son, and have them rule over Tsushima together by being role models for the citizens of the island, but he won't be able to do that if Jin continues down this path. Act 2 also shows us more about Ryuzo and how he was jealous of Jin's success and how he believes the samurai denied him the opportunity to join them despite his prowess with a sword. It's all pretty underwhelming stuff, and Ryuzo just ends up existing to be killed after his initial betrayal. I mean, I guess he does aid the Khan in capturing Jin, which results in Yuna's brother Taka being killed off in a dramatic fashion, but his role in it isn't very impactful because the Khan is the one who deals the killing blow without Ryuzo even being there, at least from what I can remember. This does, however, establish Kutan Khan as being a real threat. He wants to take over the island by allowing the samurai to join them, and coerces them into this decision by killing off people in front of Jin's very eyes. It's a guilt trip. He tells Taka he will let him live if he kills Jin, but Taka turns the knife back on him and gets beheaded in a brutal scene. If you didn't want the Khan dead yet, You certainly will now after he kills one of the most likable and friendliest characters in the game who really looked up to Jin. Act 2 comes to a boil when Jin leads an attack on Castle Shimura alongside of his allies and his uncle in order to kill the Khan. Jin assassinates a Mongol leader right in front of Shimura, and this is nearly the breaking point for the Elder Samurai. He tells Jin that this is his last chance to abandon the ghost techniques and reclaim his honor as samurai. From there, Jin watches idly as his uncle plans a suicide mission on the castle that will get many people killed in the name of the samurai code. Jin cannot stand by any longer after seeing that Shimura's code of honor will see people die needlessly, and he assaults the castle on his own by poisoning the Mongols before a head-on duel with Ryuzo. For some reason, this was one of the quickest duels I had in the game, and it left an already weak character feeling even lesser. Ryuzo just doesn't do anything that motivates us to the same level as the Khan, making him forgettable and lackluster, and that's a shame given he's supposed to be a linchpin of the story. Jin's betrayal snaps the relationship between him and Lord Shimura as the former fully embraces his role as the Ghost of Tsushima. He pushed his uncle to the limits, and his punishment is being exiled to the north where he will be hunted down for crimes against the shogun. The beginning of Act 3 shows Jin at one of his lowest points. He is disowned by his only family, he's without his allies, and he's stuck in the cold without a horse after it succumbs to injury. But his resolve is still rock solid. Jin is a man of integrity and has fully accepted that he will lose many things in his quest to eliminate the Mongols and do what is right. Jin begins Act 3 by meeting up with his surviving allies and establishing a camp at Jokaku Temple. I alluded to this before, but seeing your allies join you here is so much more impactful if you've done their ally quests. The bond is undeniably stronger with them if you've completed them all. Anyway, Jin learns that the Khan is stationed in a nearby port that is home to a massive number of Mongols. The Khan has nowhere left to run, and Jin and company formulate a plan to infiltrate and destroy the Mongols once and for all. Jin makes one last attempt to reach out to his uncle by stealthing his way into Castle Shimura and placing a note for his uncle to find. The note talks about Jin's desire for the two men to meet up someday and hash out their differences, while also asking for his aid in destroying the Khan at Port Izumi. I think I said that right. I hope I said that right. Port Izumi, that's what we're going with. And from there, the final assault begins. Jin, his allies, and eventually Lord Shimura and his men show up to help lead the final assault. Kutan Khan and Jin eventually end up together and fight in a one-on-one duel that morphs into open combat, and I really appreciated that. The game gives you the best of both worlds. You get to engage with the awesome cinematics of one-on-one duels, while also getting a section to utilize the ghost weaponry and techniques that have seen you prevail across the game. It's like the game is nodding and saying, yeah, both combat styles were equally important to the experience, and we're acknowledging that by not limiting you to one of them with the final boss. So eventually the Khan is killed, but Jin and Shimura don't meet up on this day. Jin and Yuna, who is now the most important friend of his, meet up and reflect on what has gone down before it's revealed that Shimura wants to meet with Jin. So far, the story was your run-of-the-mill tale of revenge and growth with a few interesting plot twists along the way. The finale, though, is what really made this story shine through because it subverts your expectations in a good way. Last spoiler warning of the video here. If you haven't finished the game yet, please skip to this time. You don't want to spoil this incredible ending for yourself. I wholeheartedly expected this final mission to wrap things up with a nice little bow by having Jin and his uncle reunite and embrace after completing their shared goal of repelling the Mongols. I thought they'd meet up, have a deep talk, and the game would end with them embracing and becoming father and son. Well, no, that doesn't happen. Instead, the game doesn't disrespect the characters they've established by having one side abandon their viewpoints to accommodate the other like so many other games would. The two do share a deep talk and even help a commoner in trouble before reaching the graves of Clan Sakai. It's here where Lord Shimura sticks to his code of honor and challenges Jin to a duel, claiming that he must do what is necessary to appease the shogun and see his form of justice take place. Jin scolds his uncle for refusing to grow and do what is right. And I can't really think of anything better than to play these set of lines here that sum up everything so perfectly.
The Shogun has declared you a traitor.
He ordered you to kill me.
The Ghost was an outlaw. He taught our people to defy their leaders.
To defend themselves.
With poison, a gift you gave to our enemy.
I had to stop you from throwing away our people's lives.
You have no honor.
And you are a slave to it.
From there, Jin and Shimura each write their own haiku as you reflect on loss before a final duel with your uncle. After defeating him, you're given the choice to spare his life or kill him with honor. I chose to kill him with honor to grant his wish. Just like with so many of the side quests and ally quests, things don't always end on a happy note. That is the new reality of this war-torn setting and the price of doing what is right. It was an ultra-powerful ending that was satisfying because it pays so much respect to its characters and the journeys we saw them take across the entire game. It feels like the most appropriate and realistic way to end the game, and I respect the hell out of it for that. In the end, the story of Ghost of Tsushima is compelling because it takes time to build up a believable and interesting world, it delivers characters with unwavering motivations and beliefs, and then it just allows those ideals to clash naturally without the hindrance of needing things to be happy-go-lucky like so many other games do. This game sticks to its main theme, the cost of abandoning tradition in order to do what is necessary. It's more praiseworthy because of this. Both Jin and his uncle were men of integrity, and while you can view one of them being right and the other one being wrong, you can never say that either of them wavered in seeing their perspective through to the end. Jin is a true hero. He sacrifices everything in order to save and inspire his people, and you really feel that with the game's conclusion. Overall, the story of this game is enough to keep you playing through a majority of it, but it reserves its biggest strength in the finale, which elevated all the past scenes because it stuck to what was established in them instead of forsaking them. At the time of this recording, Ghost of Tsushima is easily one of my frontrunners for Game of the Year. Its dedication to showing off its world and its characters in meaningful ways is admirable. The attention to detail and lack of any real issues with its presentation and performance leads to an undeniable cinematic quality that is unparalleled in games, even by those games that want to be a movie. Exploration is rewarding and sees the player consistently powering up Jin in meaningful ways. Combat has this dual-threat approach to it that maximizes the fun factor by giving the player a whole array of options and tools to use at their disposal. And while it may end up being a tad too easy, it aligns perfectly with Jin's transformation across the story from samurai to ghost. A strong set of believable characters are placed into an authentic world and are left to their own devices to struggle and grow within. The finale gut punches you with an impactful ending that will stick with me for a long time. Ghost of Tsushima is easily a top 10 experience on PlayStation 4, and I wholeheartedly recommend it to any fan of open world games. In a console generation defined by open world games, Ghost of Tsushima is the perfected apex of everything we've seen in this genre throughout this era. Hey, if you enjoyed this style of review and critique, please check out some of my other videos on the channel. I have lengthy reviews of Animal Crossing New Horizons, Fall Guys, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and The Last of Us Part 2 that span from 40 minutes to over an hour long. I also have massively long critiques of the first two Sly Cooper games for you if you're a fan of Sucker Punch games. as well as a 3-hour critique of Pokemon Sword and Shield. It would mean the world to me if you check them out and help this channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day, and take care.